his abuse he got so confident with the abuse and the level of abuse that he could impose upon me. I would be invited to his house, and so would another boy. Abuse one, turn over and abuse the other. And that's how confident he was in being able to abuse young boys, still knowing that even though somebody was present in the room, that they wouldn't say anything.
Okay, so let's start kind of at the beginning. When did you start playing football?
I started playing football probably when I was 3 or 4 and discovered just naturally that I had an ability to play. My earliest memories are running around with a ball, my dad's adult friends not being able to take the ball from me. I loved it. I felt I was good at it. I was able to do things that other people couldn't do and carry the ball and play with the ball in a way that just naturally came to me. I was, from that point, just out playing with a ball until my dad found a junior side for me when I was about 8. My dad apparently had been approached by this person on the side of the pitch who'd been interested in scouting me and asking me to go and play for them. He'd introduced himself as a Northwest regional scout for Manchester City, and that he could offer the opportunity to go to play for him, and also to possibly get trials and an opportunity to go to play for Manchester City as a club. Sort of beyond a small boy's wildest dreams, really. And I was just, I was playing in a small town with an absolutely no-name junior side of no real ranking or ability. And then this guy came along and sort of offered a life, really, from it. And so it was exciting.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 9, 10.
And so did you then join this new club under the guide of this coach?
Yeah, he asked me to go for a trial to see how it fit in with the players he already had. I think that extended to 2 trials, and then he asked me to go and play with his side. And the coach's name was Barry Bennell. At that time, everybody viewed him as a star maker. He was very charismatic, handsome, athletic chap, very talented at football himself. And he was seen to be someone that had a lot of influence in the game that could, make it happen for you, could recommend that you were a good enough player and get you that opportunity to potentially get to sign affiliate schoolboy forms with a club. So hugely admired, and people really flocked towards him in order to get those opportunities to play at a higher level. And played for him for about 3.5 years, very successfully. We were a very, very successful side. We were banned from one league for being too good. I remember we beat one side 37-0. I'd regularly scored double hat-tricks or more, scoring 40-odd, 50 goals a year. And the football side of it was extremely enjoyable. It was excellent standard, except there was another side to playing for him that I think now is a bit more widely known, but at the time was probably one of football's worst kept secrets, and that is that he was a prolific paedophile.
The first time you were abused,
Yeah.
Can you talk about what happened and how you were feeling at that time?
It was at his shop in Furnace Vale, in a video shop that he owned. Whilst watching I think it was American Werewolf in London, horror movies and snuff movies as they were, things that would get you scared and terrified were one of his tactics for huddling up close and starting that low level of abuse as a precursor to further things to come. And I can certainly remember that video shop in detail. And I think my mind has focused on those elements as opposed to what actually happened as a mechanism for survival and coping, really. One distinct thought, and it's not about the actual abuse, the acts of abuse. I think, you often hear this phrase of fight or flight, and actually the most common response in that type of situation is a reaction or a response called flop, which means you're just unable to do anything. And you shut down, your brain shuts down. The human body and brain is an incredible thing that can protect us in a way that I don't think we really properly understand. And so focus on the actual acts of abuse was something really that my brain's never allowed me to do. But I can say that after that first time, I remember thinking how desperately I wanted to get out of there. But I'd have to wait till the next day, till after the game, till my dad came to pick me up to be able to go home. And I remember going home and trying to make everything as normal as possible, as if nothing had happened.
And you were so young, were you aware of kind of what was happening to you was bad, or were you just...
I knew it was something I'd never experienced. I was prepubescent. I hadn't had girlfriends. I ran around with boys, played football. I had friends that were girls and grown up with friends that were girls, but they were mates. The idea of sex or sexuality hadn't even entered my head at that point. And so I was just incredibly confused. I knew it didn't feel right or something I enjoyed or was comfortable with. But other than that, because it was so confusing, I really didn't know what to say or how to say something or who to say something to. I remember thinking after the second time I went back and it happened again and got more severe, I remember thinking to myself, and thinking, I've got to tell somebody. But how do I explain to people that this has happened more than once? Why did I go back? And I didn't think I'd be believed, because if I'd gone back, maybe it was my fault or I was in some way responsible, and it was something that somebody would question. And every time I looked for a reason to say something, I found that in the environment I was in, that there wasn't a place or a person that I could speak to. And so I think it was a matter of thinking survival. How do I carry on and cope? And that the simple matter of shutting down my emotions and effectively becoming a very emotionally blunt person. And then it'd be a matter of putting on a mask and going about the daily business. And I was grateful for the normality of getting up, going to school, going to lessons, and doing the ordinary things. And that's what I focused on, to try and avoid just thinking about what happened or what might happen again, really.
You mentioned that the abuse kind of spanned a period of about 3.5 years. How did it progressively get worse from those lower levels of abuse?
Very quickly, from touching to low-level abuse, the masturbation, onto oral sex, onto full buggery. It was a matter of weeks, a couple of months. As soon as he knew that he had control of me, to one degree, he would escalate to the next. And that happened very quickly. And once it had escalated, it then maintained itself on all levels of abuse at any opportunity to which he could take. One of the things that Bennell did was that he insisted not only did I only play for his club and no other, but that I stopped all other social activities. So I played a musical instrument, I had social friends and social groups. I wasn't allowed to go and have music lessons, not allowed to have girlfriends, not allowed to have social groups, go out and party or birthdays. It was all a distraction from football. But what that meant was I had no experience of what you'd consider normal childhood development through early teens. You know, the stuff where we get girlfriends or boyfriends and we experiment with drugs or drink or social activities and we learn where that social line is. I had no experience of that because I had no comparisons against what was normal. This was my normal, and that's all I knew. Didn't take long for him to see how or what he could get away with abusing myself with. And when that started, it escalated very, very quickly from what you call low-level abuse to the most serious levels of abuse. I certainly was one of the people that he abused more regularly. You know, I was there pretty much every weekend, every school holiday. I missed a lot of school. He took me abroad. He took me away to Butlins and various places for about 3.5 years. And you know, his abuse he got so confident with the abuse and the level of abuse that he could impose upon me that for at least a couple of those years, if not longer, I would be invited to his house, and so would another boy. And there may be others, but regularly myself and this one other boy were invited. And he would have us both sleep in his bed and abuse us both. Abuse one, turn over and abuse the other. And that's how confident he was in being able to abuse young boys, still knowing that even though somebody was present in the room, that they wouldn't say anything.
And you mentioned that he would take you away on holidays and to Butlins. Was that kind of under the guise of football team bonding? Or?
Mostly. He took me wherever he wanted, whenever my parents would allow, which was pretty much every weekend, all weekend, pretty much all. I remember going home to just collect clothes in the summer holidays, you know, 6 weeks or so. And so he would just take me wherever and whenever he wanted during that period where he abused me. I spent a lot of time with him. He wanted to take me to America. The very last year I was playing for him, my parents thankfully put their foot down and said that regardless of cost, that they wouldn't let me go because he was going for 2 or 3 weeks, so it was a chunk of time. And I know that he would have absolutely taken advantage of me whilst he was away. And goodness knows if anybody else might have. I know that he certainly established contacts and business out there after that.
And at what point did the abuse stop? And was that, when it stopped, was that the last time you saw Bennell?
Yeah, it stopped very abruptly. I was about 14. We turned up for a game and we were all gathered around and he literally announced, okay, that's it. We're disbanding. And it was to everybody's shock and bemusement. Nobody really understood where this had come from or why at that moment in time would it suddenly be folded. Because at 14 was the year, 13, 14, that was the age that you signed associated schoolboy forms with any big clubs. So for him to be a scout, to pushing you through to get to that stage, to just stop 6 months before that critical point seemed very bizarre and odd. But he just basically said there's nothing that he could do anymore for us. And that was the end of it. And then there was nothing. And so I needed to fill this great big hole. And I did that really quite successfully with alcohol and recreational drugs. And that replaced the emotional void that I had from leaving football and the anger and the frustration and the negative emotions I felt. The impact of what happened to me it was so great. And I wasn't yet at an age where I was able to reflect on what had happened in a positive way and learn and progress from it, that I was just really coping as best I could.
Was it still your secret through this time as well?
Yeah, I hadn't told anybody at all. And I didn't tell a soul, I didn't indicate it. There was a girlfriend while I was at school that one time at home I'd broken down crying, saying, you know, I felt terrible, and then I stopped. I didn't even go close to saying who, what, where, or why. I got upset. The only other time that I'd spoken about it was much later on when I moved to London. And my partner and I got together, and when we were looking to consider it being a long-term relationship, through various conversations, this subject came up, and we'd started to tentatively talk about what had happened to me. And that was, well, I know when that was 1994, and I can reference that because that's when the police first contacted me in relation to seeing if I was prepared to give any statements and evidence about what might happen to me as a child. And the landline rang, and I picked it up, and it was the Cheshire Constabulary, who said that they'd been given my name with a view that I might know something about Barry Bennell, and that they wondered if anything might have happened as a child, and would I want to say anything if it had, in that they had been in contact with a 13-year-old boy who had reported suspected abuse from Bennell whilst he was in America on tour, and this boy had reported alleged abuse that happened to him, and would I consider giving a supporting statement if there's anything that I might know. The reason for saying something wasn't about me, and it never was. It was the fact that there was this 13-year-old boy, I was 25, 26 that age, that had just very recently suffered this abuse, and to avoid being re-abused had made a complaint about what happened. And it broke my heart that this was still happening to other boys. But the clincher really was the fact that the police said no one would come forward and corroborate this boy's story. And I knew from my own experience that had to be wrong, that there had to be other people. And I just felt if I was to say something, I'd hope that knowing there was a boy in the bed next to me for 2 or 3 years, that somebody else would have the courage to come forward and say something on my behalf.
How are you now?
I'm probably healthier and better than I've ever been in my life. I've processed and will continue to process these things on an ongoing basis, but process the majority of the things that have happened to me and have a far better understanding of them through therapy and counselling, and speaking about this in a more positive light. And it's enabled me to grow strength and confidence that my life isn't worthless, it has some meaning. And from 2016, the FA and the PFA had employed me in part because of my lived experience, and that's for any survivors of abuse, of any sort of abuse, not just sexual, racial, physical, financial, emotional abuse in football, either historically, non-recently, or currently, and even just be an ear for survivors to be able to help them understand that actually none of this is their fault, and that there are things that they can tap into. And, you know, I'd highly recommend anybody that's been through abuse of this sort or any sort to speak to not just somebody else, but to try and seek formal counselling and therapy, because for me, it's really helped from my experience. Not being able to speak to anybody, feeling like it's only you in a silo, can be one of the most destructive things that can happen to you. And having known people that haven't managed to get through life and have no longer with us, and those that have helped to continue on, I would always say that it's always worth speaking about it and having hope to go forwards than feeling like you're on your own, because that's a terrible place to be, and something I hope we can eradicate sooner rather than later. I reconcile myself to the fact that, you can't always choose your life's destiny. We like to think we're in control of everything, but often we're not. And certainly that part of my life, I didn't have any control over. And it's one thing I try to do now is have agency over my own life and understanding from it. So if nothing else, we hope we learn from these experiences.
I felt like defeated when I lay down, because I just was hoping that he wouldn't want to have sex with me.